welcome to Stef Talks Trash. My name is Stephanie Valentic, Editorial Director of Waste 360, and today I'll be having a discussion about plastics with Dr. Chris DeArmitt, plastic materials scientist and expert. Dr. Chris DeArmitt has done work with major corporations to find plastic solutions, such as HP, Apple, P&G, and more. Dr. Chris DeArmitt will be examining the data that we've seen in many of the headlines and articles regarding the plastics problem. Enjoy the episode.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you once again for joining me today to talk about plastics. But before we begin and get really into the discussion, can you please tell me about your background and experience working with different, major companies around, finding plastic solutions?
Yeah, so I'm a PhD scientist in chemistry and plastics. So I'm a scientist. I don't make, sell, or market plastics. What I do is help companies to make better materials. So that might be, Hewlett Packard or Proctor and Gamble or whoever would come to me, or even a lot of smaller companies and say, hey, I don't know which material to choose, or I want to make my material better and that kind of thing. And that's what I do on a technical level. That's my job. I've been on 60 Minutes with Scott Pelley explaining about plastics in the body, for example. I've been on BBC and Sky News talking about degradation of plastics. So, and I'm a bit of a data monster, I call it sometimes. When I get into something, I go and find more information than anyone else has, just to make sure that I have the facts. And I think regular people do it the other way around. They get a gut feeling and look for information that supports what they believe, whereas I try to do the opposite. I try to go in with an open mind, read, as much as I can, and then decide based on what I see.
So let's just go ahead and hop right into the discussion here. I went to the EPA's website, and the latest stats that I found were that in 2018, plastics generation was 35.7 million tons in the United States, 12.2% of municipal solid waste. And in 2018, landfills received 27 million tons of plastic. This comprised 18.5% of all municipal solid waste that was landfilled. And this is according to data from the American Chemistry Council and the National Association for PET Container Resources. So I guess my first question is, are there discrepancies in the EPA's methodology and data and the way it is portrayed? Or, where do we begin with kind of winding through the plastics problem? Is it an issue? So can you begin with that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So in general, we have a wasteful society, right? We've grown accustomed to all kinds of luxuries and we throw things away without thinking about it. I pointed out to somebody recently, right? Plastic straws are labeled disposable, but my daughter used one over 100 times without an issue, right? So, and he's now at a record. Evelio Matos is now at a record of over 200 uses, and it's as good as the day he started, right? He said that in a podcast. So we're living in a wasteful society where we generate waste. And so either we have to move back into the caves or we have to accept that we generate waste and deal with it responsibly. The trouble with big numbers, like millions of tons of this or that, is I can't picture it, right? I've never seen a million tons of anything. So, and neither has a regular person. So when I hear a number like that, I always go and try to see, what does that really mean to something my brain can understand? I quoted the EPA stats in my book. As you know, the plastics paradox, I had the same number, about 12.8% of solid municipal waste is plastics, according to the EPA. And then what I didn't realize when I read the book, so about 12.8% is plastics of solid municipal waste, and about 10% of what goes into a landfill. So they literally take a landfill, they go in there, they measure everything in it, and then they analyze it and say, okay, 10% about, because there's other things other than solid municipal waste going into a landfill. So that's still a big number, right? 10%, but you're still at like 25% for paper and cardboard, right? You're still at a much higher number for food. So plastics is 10%. And it's getting 100% of the attention, right? Nobody talks about paper, which is double the problem. No one talks about food waste, which is double the problem. Nobody talks about lawn clippings, which are equally big. So that's the thing about perspective, right? My big thing is you can't solve a problem by focusing on 10% of it, right? It's impossible. If we focus 100% of our money and attention on plastics, not that we should ignore it, but if we focus all of our attention on it, we're ignoring 90% of the problem and we will never make a dent. After I wrote the book, I got some more perspective, because what I didn't realize when I wrote the book is that solid municipal waste is only 3% of the waste we make. The other 97% of waste that we make as people is industrial waste. So it turns out that plastic waste is 13% of 3%. So it's about 0.04% of waste is plastics. So that would be like me going home, cleaning my cutlery drawer and expecting the rest of the house to clean itself, right? You'd have to be like literally insane to think that cleaning one drawer is going to clean your whole house. And that's what we're doing now. We're focusing on less than 0.5% of something, and thinking it's going to solve our problem. So my issue isn't looking at plastics. We should look at everything. But my issue is we're putting 100% of our resources into a tiny, tiny fraction of the overall problem. And that's just not smart.
So, let's move along. Let's look at some of your data and see your reasoning behind this and kind of looking down at your numbers.
So here's one of the things I was talking about, right? This is the use of materials by mankind. This is from a book, and I've double checked the figures. And plastics are less than 1% of the materials we're using. So this goes back to my point, right? You can say we're using 100 million tons of that or 200 million tons of that. It doesn't mean anything, right? It sounds big and shocking. You can get a headline, but nobody's going back and looking at perspective, right? How do we make the best? Let's say we've got $1 million or $1 billion or $1 trillion to clean up the environment. Should we be spending it on less than 1% of our problem? I would say no. If we have a certain amount, we shouldn't be focusing all on less than 1% of materials and waste. It's just ridiculous. So as we can see, according to the book, about 1% of materials is plastics. And when I looked it up, so I double checked this, and you can even ask Siri, right? You can say, hey Siri, what's the global consumption of materials? Hey Siri, what's the global consumption of plastics? You divide one by the other one. So this literally takes you 1 minute to check yourself, and you'll find out plastics are less than 1% of the materials we're using. So again, it comes back to this obsession with just like demonizing and focusing on plastics. And as a scientist, right, I solve problems for a living. And you can't solve a problem by, again, focusing on less than 1% of it. That's just not a way to progress. So that's my big thing, right? I'm not defending plastics. Like I said, I don't make, sell, or market plastics. I'm a scientist. And as a scientist, I think we should be doing a better job of starting with the data, saying we've got this much money as a society, and we should be spending it to make the most impact, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not what's happening right now.
Let's talk about the common data, the common phrases that are used when we're talking about plastics in the media and, on social media and anywhere that we're having this discussion. So let's first talk about ocean plastics, the sea turtles with plastic straws, the mounds of, the great garbage patch. Let's talk about those things. What are some of the kind of things that you're seeing in the media and social media that are being shared that are portrayed in a way that would show that plastics are a bigger issue than what you're saying in the larger perspective?
Well, if you look at the turtle video, and I've watched it, right, there at no point in the video do they talk about a straw. They say it's a worm, right? And then at the end, they pull this thing out. It looks nothing like a straw, right? It's brown. It's not like white with a red stripe on it or anything. It looks nothing like a straw. It's the wrong length to be a straw. And then they never analyzed it, right? There was never a scientific paper to prove there ever was a straw. So this is really weak. I mean, to have a global campaign based on something which is pure fiction is going a little bit too far. I get it, right? It makes a dramatic video. But if you search YouTube, you'll find dog videos where they're pulling sticks out of dogs' noses, right? So should we ban trees because sticks are going up dogs' noses? I mean, this is the same logic, right? A straw's going up a turtle's nose, allegedly. So we should ban straws. Sticks are going up dogs' noses, so let's ban trees, right? That's the logical conclusion if you follow this way of thinking. You talked about turtles, and this is a very interesting point. So this is in my new data. So these are the actual numbers. So I looked up scientific studies, and you'll see the references here, right? So everything I say is proven, right? It's all proven with data. When you see things from green groups, often it's just speculation. It's like hearsay, right? It's just gossip to get you scared and get your donation. They want to make you as angry as possible to get your money out of your pockets, it seems to me, because they never provide any evidence for what they're saying. So I can tell you as a scientist, it's a lot of work to go and find this evidence, right? I have zero interest in looking up turtle mortalities, right? That is not what gets me out of bed in the morning. But if you're going to have a discussion about something, you need to have data, right? So I went and found the data, what's killing turtles? And the answer is 50,000 die a year from shrimp trawling, 5,000 up to 5,000 die from fishery, 500 die from collisions with boats, 50 from dredging, and there's no mention of plastics, right? It's not listed in a cause of turtle deaths. It's not significant enough to even be in the stats, right? So this is telling, right? They're telling us about turtles. It makes a lovely picture. People go, oh, look at the little turtle, and they open their wallet, right? But there's no evidence that plastics are actually harming turtles in the data. If you cared about turtles, you'd be not buying shrimp, right? And you'd be campaigning against shrimp trawling. That's the impact you would. If you do care about turtles, that's where you should be spending your money and your time. And I did the same thing for whales. That's on the next slide. So here's the whale data, right? People are always talking about whale deaths. So I found, you'll see there's 4 scientific studies cited here. Let me get the mouse. So down here, this is the evidence for what I'm saying. And I'm talking multi-decade studies, right? For decade after decade after decade. They analyzed every whale death they could find, 4 different studies. And in all of these studies, there is not even one mention of the word plastic. So I mean, you literally open the PDF, you search for the word plastic, and you don't find a single hit, right? Or bag, right? So we're being told online that plastic bags are killing whales, and it's just a lie. It's an outright lie. I mean, these people should be ashamed of themselves if not taken to court, right? Because the scientists are saying this is what's killing whales. It's been studied in details for decades, right? This is not like one person's speculation. So, I mean, what can I say? This is the truth. If you want to help the environment, the first stage is to go and find the evidence. And you can literally, so this is how I do, right? This is not some magical source of information I have. If Greenpeace or World Wildlife Fund actually wanted the data instead of to make you feel sad to get your donations, they would go into Google and they would type whale mortality study. That's the only 3 words you have to type into Google. That's what I did. And that's how I found all these studies, right? But no one else is doing this work. They're believing these groups who are just trying to get your money and making crazy decisions for the environment based on fiction. And that's my problem.
There's, been a big push for biodegradable materials. A lot of companies are coming out with solutions that are, bottles and packaging materials, but there really isn't, there's no common standard to what actually is biodegradable or compostable. So Can you tell me a little bit about, kind of the data behind that and what you're seeing?
I'm not a big fan of biodegradables because they don't make sense. So if you do a life cycle analysis, which is the only way to know what's green, right? Greenpeace do it, governments do it, companies do it, whole countries do it. That's the only method we have to determine what's green. You add up everything, right? Like 15 or 18 different factors, waste and pollution and materials and transportation and everything. And if you do that, bioplastics lose, right? So usually the greenest material is if you can make something out of a block of wood, right? Like lumber for decking of your house. That's the greenest solution. Wood is the greenest solution if you can make something out of a block of wood. Second is plastic usually. Right, it depends on the application, but if you read hundreds of life cycle analysis, you'll see usually second is plastic, like polyethylene and polypropylene. But bioplastics are less green than those, so that means that replacing regular plastic with bioplastic is harming the environment. And the other problem with bioplastic is when they degrade, they give off carbon dioxide, right? And that's what we're trying to avoid. That's why we have landfills. Landfills are designed to stop things from degrading because it's so deep the oxygen can't get in there. So paper and food and everything else, nothing degrades. We're on purpose stopping them from degrading. If you make a biodegradable material, now you're like, whoa, fantastic. I've got a material that's less green, doesn't last as long, costs more money, and it's giving off all this CO2. It makes no sense on any level. I can't see the sense of it. It's a great marketing opportunity, but in my opinion, it's a massive amount of greenwashing. And if you look at some of these materials like PLA and PHA was released in 1981 by ICI. My dad had one of the first keychains of it ever. And it still hasn't really taken off because it's a rubbish material. It doesn't make sense and it's not green.
So what about metals or aluminum? They've always been touted as infinitely recyclable. Are they any better, or what are we seeing with metals and aluminum and those types of materials?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing I should say as a scientist, right, as I said, that every life cycle analysis depends on the application and where you are in the world, right, where you're located. So there's a lot of variables. But if you look at a heck of a lot of life cycle analyses like I did, this is what you find. So if you can make something out of a chunk of wood, it's the greenest solution. Like a wine cork is another example, right? If you take cork straight from a tree, that's what wine corks are made of. That's greener than a plastic cork, right? There's life cycle. There's at least 4 or 5 on wooden lumber I mentioned for decking and stuff. Wood beats plastic easily in every single life cycle analysis. So you can see, right? I'm a scientist. Imagine I was some kind of promoter for the plastics industry. And by the way, I'm doing this all unfunded. This is the most massive waste of my time I've ever done in my life, right? To campaign for this because I believe in the truth. So I'm losing money on this and no one's paying me. But anyway, so I read all these hundreds of studies. Wood wins, and then the next is usually plastic. And plastic usually beats paper, but not every time. And then steel is worse, and aluminium is worse, and glass is the worst. And when you think about it, it's easy to understand, right? I've got pictures in the plastic paradox of people making glass and metal. I mean, and we're talking about, I'm going to pause my share here so I can show you a picture. But we're talking about molten materials, right? I mean, these materials are glowing red hot when you're making them. It's like lava, right? It's not difficult to understand why plastic is greener, because plastics melt at a couple hundred degrees, whereas these metals and glasses and so forth melt at thousands of degrees. So it takes a heck of a lot more energy and CO2 and the rest of it to make these things. And that's why they're not as green. That's the main reason. I can't find the picture here. I'm not reading my own book enough. So anyway, I can't find it right now. Oh, here we are. Well, here's one picture anyway. So there's a picture of people making glass bottles, right? It's like molten lava. It's coming right out of this thing and it's going into the glass production facility glowing red hot because it's at thousands of degrees. And that's why these things are not green. And the crazy argument is this, right? People are saying, because these things are recycled, we should be using them. And it's a stupid argument. That what they're saying is, let's take the materials which we know are the most harmful and reuse them and do the harm again and again and again, right? I can't think of a great analogy for that, but it's the most stupid idea I ever heard of. The correct solution is to look at the life cycle analysis, find the greenest material, and use that again and again and again, right? So plastic recycling rates in the US are much lower than other countries, right? It's like 9%. And that's low for a couple of reasons. One is these other materials have been around a lot longer, right? If you look at glass and metal, they've been around for hundreds of years, right? So we have a lot of history and infrastructure. So we have a lot of history with these materials. And the other thing is, you can't easily recycle plastics economically. And here's a crazy thing for you, Stephanie. This will blow your mind, right? If you look at the worst materials in the world for the environment, do you know what they are? Palladium, platinum, and gold. They are hideous for the environment. You have to make 25 tons of waste to make 1/3 of an ounce. It's like as much in a small ring, right? Less than that. 25 tons of waste, including cyanide and other dangerous chemicals, right? Going off into the waste to make a tiny bit of gold. But you never throw it away and you always recycle it. You know why? Because it's expensive. Do you know why it's expensive? Because it's horrendous for the environment, right? Things that take a huge amount of energy and generate a huge amount of waste, they're expensive and terrible for the environment. The same things that make something green are the same things that make them expensive and worth recycling. Plastics are on the other end of that scale, right? Plastics are so green, according to life cycle analysis, that they're no longer worth recycling. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's the irony of it. The greener something is, the cheaper it is in general, as a general trend, because the less energy you have to put into it and the less pollution you have to pay for and everything. And it makes it not worth recycling. So this is where these government schemes come in. I'm not a big fan of government schemes, but basically you have to give people incentives to recycle plastic because they're so green, it doesn't make economic sense to recycle them. And that's happening now. So companies like, I think it's Nestle and Unilever have committed to we're going to buy this enormous amount of recycled plastic at this price, guaranteed, right? So that means now people can go and build a recycling factory and know that they'll have business and make money for a certain period. Whereas before, the recyclate price was going up and down. So you'd be making money one day and then you go out of business the next day. So you couldn't build an infrastructure.
So, you have a lot of legislation that's been introduced, especially with this new administration that's in with the Break Free from Plastics Act, from Pollution Act, and the Recycle Act. They're looking not only to bolster infrastructure, but to stop plastics generation. What is this? What do you think this would do to the state of, the materials that we have available and to, the packaging that's available into the state of plastics?
Yeah. Well, it's a shame, right? So let's look at plastic bags are the most well-known example, right? So there are 25 life cycle analyses on bags in the world, like Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Canada, several in America. There's a new one in Singapore that just came out, and every single one says plastic bags are the greenest. Every study ever done in the world says plastic bags are the greenest, and these idiot politicians are planning to ban them, right? It just doesn't make sense. So what we have to understand about companies and politicians is they either want your votes or your money, right? They're not motivated by being good. They're in it for your money or your vote. And so I like to say any politician who votes for something as stupid as that is either too lazy to have checked the facts, because the facts are there, right? You can do a Google search and find all this in 30 seconds. Just type in LCA grocery bag, right? LCA, life cycle analysis grocery bag, and you will find studies all around the world that prove plastics are greener than paper or cotton or bioplastics. So any politician who votes for that is either too lazy to check the facts, too stupid to understand the facts, or too corrupt to care about the facts. Those are the only three explanations I can think of. It's as clear as that, because the science is absolutely clear. It's all done. and banning plastics will 100% harm the environment.
So basically your overall message today is that, plastics are only, a small part of our waste issue in this country. So what do we do moving forward? What are, the solutions to kind of treating this whole issue of waste and making sure that, we reduce the things that end up in landfill, and whose responsibility is it? Is it extended producer responsibility that we've been seeing, another legislative topic we've seen coming out this year, or, is it individual responsibility?
Yeah. Interesting. So, well, one thing to say, because I know this is Waste 360, right? So you're focused on waste. So they've done studies that prove that to replace 1 pound of plastic requires 3 or 4 pounds of other material. And in the book, I show where they've analyzed the EPA, well, you mentioned EPA earlier, right? Waste per person was going up like this, and total waste. They were both going up linearly for many decades. And then plastics came and it went flat, because plastics, although they increase, they reduce the overall waste massively. Right. So if you get rid of plastic, you will have vastly more waste. And that's a scientific fact. So that's one thing, right? Plastics are important for reducing waste. In general, as a society, for sure, we need to reduce and reuse and recycle, all that stuff, right? That all makes sense. When it comes to responsibility about waste, the way I see it, well, about litter anyway, is that, you buy something and you're responsible for disposing of it correctly. I like to make the analogy, right? If my kids drop their jeans on the floor, I don't expect Levi's to come and pick them up, right? That's ridiculous. And everyone laughs when I say it. If I park my car in the wrong place, I don't expect Ford to come and get it, right? That's preposterous. And somehow when somebody drops a candy wrapper on the floor, they think Cadbury's is responsible, or Nestle, or whoever. I mean, that is just, in my opinion, and I don't want to offend anyone, but it's just childish thinking. It's unbelievably ridiculous to think that somebody's going to jump out of your local bush and pick up your wrapper that you just dropped. I mean, they've done studies on litter in America. 81% of people are literally, they sit in the car and watch people dropping litter, right? They record it. They do a study every year. And 81% of litter in America, somebody literally stands there and drops it on the floor right in front of a trash can. Right. And then they turn around and they blame Nestle or Coke or whoever, or they blame the material. And that's just pathetic. My solution to litter is this: $1,000 fine, and you have to clean up litter for a week in the street in front of your neighbors, not somewhere else, in front of your neighbors with a big jacket on labeled litterer. Right. And the litter would stop instantly because these people would be shamed out of doing it. That's my response to that. So, and the other thing is, when it comes to waste, right, when you buy something, you're already giving sales tax or whatever kind of tax to your government to put in trash cans, to come and collect your waste, to do everything. So you've already paid for waste disposal once, right? If you put a tax or some producer responsibility, you're paying for the same thing twice, right? Because these companies are not doing anything out of magical free money. All the money they collect comes from us. So if you want to put a tax on whoever, Coca-Cola, right, to clean up everything, we're going to pay more for our Coke, and then they're going to go and have money to go and clean up this waste, which we've already paid to clean up in the Western world in our taxes. So I don't quite get that. I don't get this. To me, it seems like a wild money grab by the politicians to try and claim, the same money twice.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me again today. Do you have any final thoughts, anything on plastic or anything that, you really like to say to really, kind of drive in your point and your, perspective and your data?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say is I don't care what you believe, but just check the facts. I've shared all this for free, right? I'm not making money for this. This is the biggest money loss that I've ever had, is putting my thousands of hours creating websites, writing the book. It's all a giant write-off for me. It's not even written off. It's not even on the taxes. It's out of my personal money, right? So all I would beg you to go to plasticsparadox.com and see the facts, because everything you believe now is just hearsay. In court where they have hearsay, it's like, oh, that's just a rumor. You can't believe that. There's no evidence for it. That's what you believe. So people believe plastic bags are bad. They're the greenest solution. People believe plastic straws are bad. They're also proven to be the greenest solution, right? So just go and get the facts. And then as a grown-up, make up your mind once you see the actual evidence. That's all I would say to people. Because at the moment, good people are doing harm based on lies.
Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of Stef Talks Trash. For this and other episodes, please visit waste360.com. Have a great day.